And today we're going to talk about Codolex, what it can do to help you improve your development speed. But first, let's give you a little bit of background why we came to Codolex. Because at GDK Software, we have 30 Delphi experts in the Netherlands, in the UK, and Brazil, and we do a lot of Delphi upgrades and expert services. But we also do regular development work for many different lines of businesses for customers worldwide. So we see a lot of legacy Delphi projects. And with these projects, you see a lot of the same problems and frustrations over and over again. For us, we see, for example, that developments can take a lot of time and cost therefore a lot of money. You have to do a lot of searching in the source code. There's sometimes a lack of overview. Often you do the same kind of things, sometimes only with minor changes. And it's difficult to have the business logic visible in a good way. In the end, if you have a look at source code, especially large code bases and legacy code bases, they can be difficult to navigate through, and you need to interpret what the code actually is and what it does to get a good understanding of the way the business logic works within this application. It's also difficult to integrate with web applications and REST APIs. With the newer versions of Delphi, it is easier, but still it is a lot of manual typing, especially with JSON. And last point, low code is a solution for these kind of problems. So with a low code software solution, you build your application logic visually using building blocks. The problem with most of these low code systems is that they have a vendor lock-in and you don't have the source code available. In addition to that, you can't easily use this in your existing Delphi application because usually it is a completely different solution, different language, and you can't use your low-code solution integrated within your existing Delphi application. On top of that, most of the time it is a black box as well, so you really can't see what's happening under the hood. Therefore, we at GDK Software developed a different solution, Codolex. With Codolex, you have the advantages of a low-code system. You have your building blocks, you can visually build your business logic. The business logic is transparent, searchable, it's easy to use, and as an extra, it's not a black box. With Codolex, you build your flows, your business logic, but you also get all the source code that we generate, so there is no vendor lock-in. And what I'm going to show you is just the start, the beginning of a lot more. We have a lot of ideas we want to implement in Codolex. But first, let's get to a demo to give you a brief overview of how simple it is to access a REST API. I also add some configuration, and after that, we're going to see some demo about using Codolex with data and databases.
All right. So what we're going to do is access this REST API to validate if a phone number is correct, is valid. So as you can see here, we have to provide an API key and the phone number, and what we get back is a JSON string with the results. So if this number is valid, where it is from, if it's a landline or not, etc. Okay, so we're going to Delphi. As you can see here, I already installed Codex into my Delphi IDE, and I created a configuration data source where we're going to store the configuration of this API. So let's call this, I create a new entity, phone configuration, or maybe even shorter, phone API config. And let's add a URL and an API key. Okay. So we now have an entity we're going to use within Codolex where we store and load the configuration files from. So to be able to store and load the configuration, what we're going to do is add a module and a class, and in the end a flow. So the flow is the lowest level of Codolex. This is where you define your business logic and where you basically do all the work. So let me call this check config, for example. And as you can see here, we have now an empty flow with a starting point and end point and all the building blocks we can use. Let me change the layout a bit so I have more room for Codolex. There you go. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we first create an instance of the entity we just defined. So I drag in the create variable, I define the entity type, and now what we're going to do is select the specific entity we just created. Okay. Let's say we want to store this in a JSON file. What we can do is drag the next building block in to do the other one, the entity to JSON. And we have now a JSON string from the entity. Now, last thing we want to do is we want to store this in a file. For that, I want to add a parameter to specify the file path where we're going to store all the data, so file path. And we simply say write file. I want to write the JSON into this file. Okay. Now, of course, this is the business logic, but what we now want to do is connect the business logic to Delphi. So here, as you can see here, I have an empty main form, so an empty Delphi project. And now we're going to connect this flow to my Delphi project. So for that, I add a T button. And in the onClick, we simply say, I right click on the config and say using code. What happens is that Codolex will add the call to this specific flow, and if I compile, also generate all the source code that is required for this. So the only thing I have to provide here is a file path. So let's say I want to store this get home path, maybe in my home path. Config.json. Okay. Good. So if we run this, should be able to get an empty configuration file, because what we've done is created the flow, created an entity, converted this to JSON, and wrote it in a file. So let me see if we have a file here. There you go. So this is our configuration file. Of course, it's empty, but the logic works. So what we're now going to do is copy the API key in here and the URL, because we want now the next flow, and that is to read this into an entity. So read it back again. So for that, I create a new flow, get config. Maybe it's good to check if the file exists. So we drop in a file exists activity. For that, we again need the parameter. And what we now can do is add a decision, which is basically an if statement, where we can define what happens if the file exists or if the file does not exist. So let's say we want to have this as a decision on the file exists activity. So what we're now going to do is say, okay, let's say the file does not exist, then we want to create it. So then we want to call this check config flow. So what we can do is simply drag this here in, connect these two together, and specify here this is equals false. So if the file doesn't exist, we'll call this flow check config. Now the only thing of course I have to do is provide a file path, and then we're good. So now we'll merge these two together. There you go. So this is the business logic to check a file, create an empty file if necessary. And now what we're going to do is read back from the file. So we again use the file path. Now we know this is a JSON text, so put in here JSON as a name and to the JSON2 entity. So what we do is store this into this entity and select the JSON file. Now the last thing I want to do is set this as a return value for the flow. So in by using that, we can use the entity from this JSON file into another flow or into our code. So let's first do this into code to see if this all works. So I go back to my main form. I'll change this to get config, and we say we want to store this into the configuration file. Now to see if it all works, let me just say config.url. So we get a message with the URL from this JSON file. So let's see if this works. Okay, it does. So basically with these 3 lines or 4 lines, we have our configuration system working using the business logic in flows. Now the next step, of course, is to access the REST API. So we're going to do that now. We simply create a new flow, validate. So we have an empty flow, and what I also do is change these two to private flows. So we can only use the configuration from within our own class. So let me open the validate again. Good. So what we need again is a parameter, actually 2 parameters. The first one is of course for the file path. The second one is the phone number we are going to check. So phone to check, also string. Okay. Now, of course, we need the configuration. So I'll drag in the get config with this one. Let's call this config. So now we have an object or an entity with the configuration details in it. Now I want to access the REST API. So for that, I drag in the REST operation activity, building block, and I configured it using the values I defined earlier. So I need a configuration URL, of course. I need an API key. The config.api key as a query, and the phone, which is the phone to check parameter we defined earlier. Okay. Well, the results phone API as results. Okay. To see if this works, let's set this as a return value, and again change the main form. Let's do it a little bit different now. Validate. What we're going to get back is not a config, but a JSON results, phone API results. And let's put a memo in here. With all the results. So JSON results. There you go. I made an error, which is, oh yeah, of course, because we need to provide the phone number as well. So let's add a phone number and do this again. Because that was my second parameter I dragged into the flow. There you go. So now we get back the same results as you saw earlier. But of course, this is just text, and we want to use this as entities as well, because that works a lot easier in Codolex and in your project, your Delphi project. So let me copy this and create a new data source specifically for this phone API. So let's call this phone API. It is memory, and save this one. And what we're now going to do is import the results from this JSON result I got back into my phone API. So I just paste in the results and click next. As you can see, I can now select all the objects. I'm going to change this root elements or rename it. So it's a better name, because by default you get a root element. Now I want to have this as phone API results. Okay, and I'm going to back to my flow, because what I want is convert this results of the API back to a entity I can use in my application. So again, I use here the JSON to entity. Now I select here the phone API result entity I want to create, and I put in the API results. This is phone API. And let's set this as the result of my flow. So now if I go back to my main form, this will be the API results, or phone API result is maybe even better. And here I have the actual results. So if I have a look at this one to see what's in here, I could say, for example, location. So location is phone API result.location. Okay, so let's run this again. And as you can see here, we now have the actual location of this phone number. So I now have a typed way of getting to the results of the REST entity. The REST call. So it's all now in the phone API result entity, which we can use in our application or even in other flows. Okay, so I think that's it for the first demo. So here you can see how you easily build these flows and connect to REST APIs, convert from and to JSON, have this in entities. And for the next demo, we're going to talk a little bit about databases and how you can integrate this into Codolex. Because most of the applications we use have some sort of database connection. Sometimes directly, sometimes via a entire model, but usually you have data somewhere. Codex also gives you a way of working with data on a very easy way. To show you this, I already created a database, a SQLite database with some tables in the database. And what I'm going to do here is add this the link to this database to Codex. So we create another data source, DemoDB. It's a database. And here I already defined the local data source, so my connection to my actual database on my system, which is called DemoDB. So let's add this one. Again, the same way as we've done with the phone API importing in JSON file, here we can simply import all the data, or basically the data structure, into Codolex. So I select both the tables and the views, and we get all the entities that are defined in this database. I've used here a SQLite database. Of course, you can use all types of databases like SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle. But here for this demo, I used a SQLite database. Now, as you can see, we have several tables in this database, courses, users, events. For now, what I want to do is show how you can get all the course, the data from this course table into Codolex. So we go back to the root and add a new module, and let's call this simply courses. Again, I add a flow. This is course provider, a class and a flow. Let's say get courses. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is add a building block get from database. With the get from database, I can simply select an entity, so course in my case, and provide several other options to get all the data from this database into an entity of Codolex. If I want, I can here filter on several things, so several fields, or even add joins to other tables. In this case, like the event table. So I could say here, I want to have this event date in the future. So I filter all the courses for all the events in the future. For now, I just want to have all the courses which are in the database and put this in a list. To start, let's say we want to have this back as a result of this flow. Go back to my main form, and let's delete this and call the get courses. Again, so you see the course provider being created as an interfaced class, and we get all the courses in the database. And one of the benefits of using it like this is that you can also use a for-in loop, for example, to loop through all the courses. So I could say here for a course in my course lists, I know there are just 4 in here, so I can, what's this one? I can here say course dot, have to compile, and then you see the auto completion as well. But I think it's course.name, which we can use. Let me see if this works. And if I click the button, I see my first course, second, third, and fourth. All right. We can also, of course, have this as data-aware controls. Because in the end, a lot of you probably will use data-aware controls to connect to data from the database. So Codex also supports this. If I delete this memo and show you that we have here a dataset and a Codex project. So let's drop these, both these two, onto my form and define projects. Connect this all together. And to be able to use this, we just need a regular T data source as you're used to. Connect this to the data set. And let's put a grid in here, so TDB grid. Okay, connect this to the data source. Okay. And what we now here want to do with the Codolex dataset is specify the entity I want to use. So I can simply double click on this, use course in this case, and get all the fields from this table. Do this for the grid as well, and change the implementation of the button click. So we can delete this to say Codolex, what's the name again? Codolex dataset1 dot open. And if you now run this application, Codolex will use the entity course as we defined in our Codolex project and fill the related data. So as you can see, this works with data-aware controls as well. All right. You can do more with the data, of course. Let me close this one down, have the Codolex view again. There you go. Because what we have here is a complete list of all the courses in the database. You can do more with this using other activities, like, for example, loop through all the results. So I drag in the building block loop. I can specify what I want to loop in. So I want to loop over the course list. And within my loop, I can do things with this loop. So like, or with the variable in this loop. So I can say I want to change something. So let's say I want to change the course, the actual course I have here, and I want to have this status increased, for example. So I can say course.status plus 1. And what we have to do is save this back to the database. So drag this in, connect these two together, and here specify what I want to save, in this case the course. So now we have a list from the database. We can modify the list, save it back to the database. Usually what you want to do probably is have this in a separate flow. So what you could do is like add flow, increase status. So now I have a new flow in here. I simply copy these two. Oh, I created a class. That's not the correct one. Let me delete this one. It should be a flow in here, of course. So increase status. Make this private. And here, drag these into the flow. The only thing we have to provide here, of course, is a parameter as an entity, because we want to have this course here in this flow. So it's not available right away. So I'll do it like this. And then we have to, of course, select this again. Course.status plus 1. And save my object. Now, the last part is that if in the get courses we want to loop, of course, as we have here, we want to loop over all the courses in my list. I can simply drag this increase status into my flow and provide the value for the parameter. And now it will loop over the course list and it will call this flow. All right. Let me go back to here. Say there is some error in a activity. So you get some exception and you want to add exception handling to this. Well, this is also possible with Codolex. So I can say here I want to add an exception, exception handler. So in case there is some error in saving the flow, what I can do is define business logic to define what happens if there is a problem when I save this object, or whatever you want, of course. So save error saving object. You can provide, of course, more information. And here you have defined an exception handling for the save object. Now, if you want to know how this works internally, you can always show the preview of the source code. So if I click here on preview, I can see what's behind this flow, basically. So this flow, which I showed you here with the exception and the change variable, if I do a preview, you can see the actual source code that Codolex generates and that Codolex also provides to your application for use. So you can show the preview of the flow, but also of the complete class. So if I right-click on this one, say preview source code, I have my complete class with both the increased status as a private and the public courses flows. All right, one last thing I want to show, and then we go back to the presentation. So what we've done so far is we created all these this business logic in Delphi, in the Delphi integration. We also provide a standalone app for Codolex. Sometimes it can be useful to have a standalone application where you can simply do the same things as we've done before, but within a dedicated editor. So this is the Codolex application. What I can do here is load my demo project. You see that this is the same project, and here, of course, you can do exactly the same thing. So here we have the flow with the loop, the increased status flow, etc. Now, one last thing I wanted to show you what you can do with Codolex is the search options. As you can see here, we have our demo application with the entities. Now, let's say I want to know exactly where this entity has been used in my application. And of course, this is a small test application, but imagine you have a really large legacy application and you exactly want to know where this table is used. By doing a text search, you get way too many results, of course, because the module is called like this. We have flows with course in the name. So it's quite difficult to exactly identify where this entity is used. With Codolex, it's a lot easier because you can simply right-click on entities or flows or activities or whatever you want and say search usage. What that does is that it'll provide you with a list of places where this specific entity is in use. So as you can see here, it's associated to another entity, which is correct because we have the event entity, which is linked to the course. But also it's in use in these two flows as an activity, as an end, and even as a parameter. So that way you can even double click on it to go directly to the place where this entity has been used. So that way it's really easy to find and navigate your way through business logic, especially within larger applications. Now, of course, we provide a text search as well. If you want to do that, I can simply search on course, but then you see that you also get the modules, the entities, etc. All right, there's a lot more to say about Codolex, but I think I'll leave it for now. Well, as you can see, validation. We have a lot more activities we can talk about, and maybe there's some time to do that in the Q&A. But I think that's it for now. Let's go back to the presentation.
All right, what's next? So as you've seen, you can use Codolex to really improve your development speed with Delphi for new applications. But it's also possible to integrate this with your existing, maybe legacy applications. You will see that the development speed will increase a lot, but that's that you also have a lot better overview of the business logic of your application. So what's next? Well, as you can see, we have the roadmap for the next versions. First of all, we really like to hear your feedback on Codolex. After you install it, you can play with it. We have a free beta version available. So please download it, try and provide us with feedback. What do you think of it? Do you miss certain activities? Do you miss functionality, or can you just work with it as it is right now? Please let us know. For the next step, we are creating a lot more activities for REST, for OAuth 2, integrate with certain AI services. We want to add a lot more database related activities. So we have a fairly good overview of what we want to do next. But again, love to hear your feedback as well. And lastly, we think of implementing a way of sharing code that you have developed with Codolex. For example, if you've developed a SAP or let's say DocuSign connection from Codolex, it would be really nice to exchange all these developments so we all together make Codolex a better product. So how to start? Well, as I said, we have a free beta version available. You can use that to get started, to play around with it. It's fully functional, so if you go to codolex.com, you can find the installer there and download Codolex and start working with it. But we've also a licensed version. With the licensed version, you will get priority support. We personally onboard you, so we help you with the setup of Codolex, the installation maybe in your existing environment. We provide extra training, and for this month you get a lifetime discount of 50% on the price of Codolex. So if you want that, just go to codolex.com/now, and you will find the subscription available there. All right. Well, that's it for now. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or send them via the support desk. You can find it on our website or just simply send an email to support@codolex.com. All right. Thanks for watching, and we'll